Next up, I'd like to introduce Lizbeth Vázquez. The title of Lizbeth's, which I will bring up in a moment, is Applied Yogic Darshana through the Foundations of Patanjala, Yoga Shastra, and Hunter Pradipika for Spanish speakers.
Thank you for that introduction, Chris. And thank you, Madeline, for bringing balance to my sense of being in this So,
Sorry. There you go.
So good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Lizbeth Vázquez, and today I'm...
There's a little bit of feedback. Maybe you can pull the mic out.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah,
sorry.
I need movement in my being right now, too, so... we'll play that. Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. So today I will present to you Applied Yogic Darshana through the Foundations of Patanjala Yoga Shastra and Hatha Yoga Pradipika for Spanish speakers. And first of all, I just want to show my deep sense of gratitude for everyone here, and specifically also to Deanna Cook, Professor Deanna Cook, who's in the back. Thank you for building bridges. It is tremendously grateful. And just everybody else, I would also like to introduce my family. My mother, Elizabeth, and my brother, Axel, who are here in the back. So with that being said, so what is Darshana? What is Patanjala Yoga Shastra? And what is Hatha Yoga Pradipika? Darshana comes from the Sanskrit word drish, which means to see. It also means vision and appreciation, and even a glimpse. It is through my vision that I wore the lens of two foundational texts in the Yoga Studies program. And to complete this study, I recognized the need of a trauma-sensitive lens. First, I introduced the Yoga Sutras as foundational texts for human ethics, suffering, therapy, spirituality, and liberation. As Hula's beautifully presented to us last Monday, there's a lot of things going on at the same time, so there we go. As Hula's beautifully presented to us last Monday, the Shastra was synthesized before 400 CE, and it is still a mystery who's its compiler. The second literature I used was the Hatha Pradipika, which is a compilation of earlier texts composed by Swadharma in the 15th century CE. I utilized Swadharma and Yoga Shastra teachings to reveal the need for trauma-sensitive yoga to assess the Spanish-speaking population. My main motivation is clear. There is a need and a demand for Spanish yoga because according to the Consensus Bureau projection in 2015, Hispanics will comprise 28.6% of the total population by the year of 2060, with 119 million Hispanic individuals residing in the United States. Yeah. Let's just see. I was born in the Caribbean Sea, right on the Riviera Maya. The Spanish language runs through my veins. It is through my ancestry that yoga is in my genes. I grew up with the most amazing mother who showed me how to live a life of selfless service and at the same time showed me the hardships of what it means to be a Hispanic in the United States. I have U.S. citizenship from birth through my grandfather, who was naturalized at the age of 12 under the Bracero movement in the 1940s. 60 years later, at the same age as my grandfather, I migrated to the U.S. During this very early time, my parents shared my custody. So every other year, I would spend 1 year in the Riviera Maya and another year in the U.S. with my mother. For about 5 years of my teenage life, I jumped through different schools, moved to different houses, and met all sorts of people, until at the age of 8, I settled in the U.S. This unique experience allowed me to get a greater insight to the issues faced by the Hispanic population in the United States. Recently, one of my Buddhist teachers who is here today taught me the importance of living in the present moment. I realized that it is through the present moment where I can be the change that I wish to see in the world. As a recipient of the lesson, As a recipient of the Lens Foundation Fellowship at the Yoga Studies program, I have been privileged to conceptualize philosophical, ethical, psychological, and therapeutic principles of yoga, as well as gaining field experience at a sociological level in the real world. Through this process, I began to apply yoga on and off my cushion and in the world. Through dialogues within the LA social justice communities and educators in the yoga field, I learned that my life as a yoga student and professional were not separate from institutions and social structures. Through inquiry as a fellow, I recreated the LMU Yoga Studies student community outreach. Such outreach allows yoga studies students to teach within systems such as prisons, homeless shelters, halfway houses, and in halfway houses in marginalized communities. I am grateful to be part of the dialogue between LMU yoga therapists and yoga mindfulness and social change participants on how to better address the issues of systemic oppression and collective trauma. Because trauma doesn't happen just at the individual level. It happens at a collective level. It is through the process of open dialogues, diverse views, reflection, and yogic methods that we can recognize how one contributes to the issues of systemic oppression and collective trauma. In my research project, I used the Patanjala Yoga Shastra and Hatha Pradipika and trauma-sensitive yoga. Through this literature review, I was able to assess the individual self, along with recognizing collective trauma and systemic oppression, preventing the Spanish-speaking communities from healing. For my research, I surveyed 23 Spanish-speaking yoga practitioners. I used the data gathered from my Spanish yoga class at the South Central Family Health Center. I also attended a bilingual yoga class at a studio and observed online yoga Spanish-speaking classes. I then compiled the statistics of my surveys to summarize the results and research findings. And finally, I created a pedagogical pilot curricula to teach yoga to these particular communities. There are main questions I focused during my research. How do yoga practitioners deconstruct colonial biases and respective systems of oppression, and as well as diversify the Western yoga practice? And how can the Yoga Shastra and Hatha Pradipika be used to create a yoga curriculum under a trauma-sensitive lens for the Spanish-speaking population that would address the hardships and specific needs of this group? With this result, the survey asked, what is the meaning of yoga? I was really surprised to see how the majority of respondents of yoga thought of yoga as both physical and a spiritual practice. The gender demographics of the study show me predominantly women. The survey asked the reasons why the participants didn't practice yoga, and research revealed that it was due to lack of place and time of practice. The respondents were asked if they thought about yoga as a way of life, and 56% of them responded no, but I was surprised to see that about 35% of them said yes. I thought that was a significant number. This data reveals that there is a need for Spanish yoga in Los Angeles. So there is a need, but what are the pedagogical principles to teaching Spanish yoga? And to answer these questions, I look at the Yoga Shastra and Hatha Pradipika. I realized that both the Yoga Sutra and the Hatha Pradipika were only addressing the self as it relates to itself, without considering the social structures around it. This is why trauma-sensitive yoga is important to see not just the individual itself, but the individual as part of a collective structure and systemic trauma. What is common for people who experience or live in the experience of trauma is a disconnection from their feelings as a coping mechanism. Another commonality is a feeling of not being validated by those around them. Addressing these issues, trauma-sensitive yoga not only addresses the individual problems, but it addresses the problems that are happening outside of the self at a systemic level that are preventing the individual from healing. So this is how trauma-sensitive yoga addresses a systemic issue. Here we see a graph and scale that can help one see where they are in terms of privilege and oppression. Here you can use the scale to determine your positionality from 0 to 10. 0 being the amount of least oppression and the most access to resources, such as the privileged group, and 0 being the complete opposite. On the right circular graph, we have multiple layers of human trauma, from the intrapersonal to the universal. Well, everyone has experienced hardships and trauma. There are certain groups that live in it at every moment due to systemic oppression. Okay, hold on. My research shows how trauma-sensitive pedagogy has to begin with the recognition of a need for connection. It also reveals that the individuals who are exposed to chronic trauma experience psychological problems of disconnection and disassociation, a sense of disempowerment, a lack of agency, and even physical manifestations of trauma. For example, shaking and memory loss. To address these manifestations of trauma, we need to provide the individual with tools that enable them to be in the present moment, because it is in the present moment that we can regain self-agency, power, as well as notice and predict when physical manifestations will happen. Oh, this was not supposed to be like that, but that's okay. It was actually cleaner before when we went back and forth. You can scratch those. I'm going to explain those verbally, but you can see the circle right here. And this is how it goes. So how can one be trauma sensitive? First, by getting to know myself through the perspective of yoga, as well as how I am perceived by others through ethnicity, language access, social economic status, physical traits, age, religion, physical and mental ability, intellectual ability, education, gender, and civil status. So that would be the very first one. Second, I need to identify my place within the system. Third, I identified connections within the system and the different parts of the system. Fourth, I need to acknowledge the need of inclusivity and diversity. Fifth, I recognize my positionality. This is where this is not prevalent anymore, but instead, recognizing my positionality with the lines and scales of privilege and oppression that I previously showed you guys. Fifth, recognizing systemic patterns of injustice. Seven, when we see patterns that are unjust, we seek to organize for those people that are silenced. Consistently, coming back to the present moment and the awareness of the systems which we operate. The most powerful way to heal the systemic issues of oppression is through creating meaningful connection between the privileged and the oppressed. We can bridge the gap between two by creating inclusive yoga spaces rather than elitist ones. Second, it is important that the privileged groups engage in selfless service. What goes beyond donating money, because money can never buy the value of human connection. It is only through making personal connection and having interpersonal experiences with the oppressed that privilege can begin to use that the privileged can begin to use their privilege for the benefit of all beings. This is to be done not by embodying an ego-driven role of the savior, but by coming back to our humanness that let us be present with each other, that lets us be present with each other, acknowledge the struggles of the other, and have radical self-compassion. Preguntas, questions? Yes, Catherine?
Do you have an idea of how you would like to create more Spanish-speaking yoga spaces going forward?
Yeah, so, you know, since my study was seen, like I had students that were under the age of 20, and then older women that were over the age of 50, and looking through the structural oppressive lens, I realized that was my timer. I realized that students at school, the age 20 and less, at school need a Spanish yoga class. Like, why not encourage them, you know, to start a Spanish yoga class in the academic setting? And then for my older group, it's interesting because I work at the South Central Family Health Center, and the women there, they want to learn English. So the class goes both ways. Like, I speak in English and I speak in Spanish. And they tell me, well, Lizbeth, like, do you have like any videos or something that we can follow? Because you're just so encouraging, and every time we get out of here, like, we just feel so empowered. But when we leave, we're just not practicing. And I was like, okay, well, let me just think about that and consider maybe, you know, putting something together for them in that medium. And they do have access to, you know, media and stuff. So yeah. Thank you for your question. Yes, Terry?
So congratulations.
Thank you.
And I know that you talked about, as part of your thesis, that you developed a pilot program. Have you taught it anywhere yet?
Yeah, so I've been experimenting at the South Central Family Health Center.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, whenever I'm teaching there, the women know that when I first taught the pilot program, I came from a lens where I told them this is not a religious class. But through each class, as they went by, they began to notice the need of spirituality, and how everything that I was doing and the dialogue that I was having with them, because I would bring elements of cosmology and the universe and our interconnection with something greater and the systems that we live in, that they begin to have questions about God, you know, and their sense of just emptiness or just the sense of lack. So, yeah, I mean, we visit both Patanjali. I tell them Sanskrit words. They enjoy the downward facing dog in Spanish. It just sounds very funny. Perro boca abajo. And so they really enjoy every single piece that I give them through the Hindu lens.
So perhaps when you're back from vacationing and you rehab from all of this, we can talk about a Spanish-speaking class with Yoga Wellness.
Hi, Mother.
Estoy muy orgullosa de que seas mi hija
Gracias, Flaca.
y también estoy orgullosa de la presentación que diste. Hablo en español porque tu programa es para hispanos.
Oh, she's speaking in Spanish because the program is for Spanish speakers, she's saying.
Gracias por haber pensado en nosotros los latinos
Thank you for thinking of us,
como
the Latin
comunidad,
people, for the community.
y pienso que vas a llegar muy lejos.
And I think you'll go very far.
Dios te bendiga y
God bless you.
felicidades otra vez.
And congratulations.
¡Vale!
Yes, Fredo.
Dios te bendiga, Lizbeth, y gracias a la familia. ¿Cuál es tu sueño para tu futuro en español y inglés, por favor?
Yeah.
So I see this going where it's not just for the unprivileged, marginalized, but there's a lot of privileged Hispanics here in the United States. And I noticed that they'd much rather take an English class or be around, you know, a community that speaks English rather than, you know, go to the Spanish class. And I think that if I could diversify it within the yoga studios, and just maybe across, like, maybe within even, like, I don't know, I'm just coming to my mind right now, like through the website, cater a bilingual or an open space for not just the unprivileged, but a community as a whole, because even Mexico themselves, there's a huge racist polarity that the people need to integrate with their own people. So that's one. Thank you. Yeah, thank you.